Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Moving into the Future. Today, I am joined by Fred Buscaglia from Macro. We're here at Savills today to have a conversation about project management. Fred has been in the business for over 30 years.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for that. 30 years. Thanks.
30 years, a long time, and he's seen a lot, so he's a good person to have a discussion with. And at Macro, he's focused solely on the tenant representation side after spending a large amount of time at JLL. So, Fred, what's it been like focusing now more solely on the tenant's best interest?
So, one of the reasons why I came to Macro, lots of reasons, but one of the primary reasons was they're purely focused on the tenant rep side, not the agency side. Even though they have a lot of supporting groups within the organization, my focus is really on the tenant rep on the interior side of the business.
Right, and it's so interesting when you do make that shift, because in the past, you'd be working with both ends, and we've actually had you on the podcast before, a recurring guest.
Exactly. This is my second one.
Yeah.
So that's always been a challenge on firms that do both agency work and tenant rep work. Being on both sides of the equation, I think is a little, it could be positive, it could be valuable to the tenant and to the landlord, but oftentimes I think it's viewed as a little bit of a conflict potentially. And here, since we don't dabble in the agency side at all, it's just full-on tenant rep work.
Right, and I think too, I think of it like when you're working with a law firm. You don't really want to be working with somebody who's working with the plaintiff and the defendant. That can get a little sticky.
Well, they have lots of systems in place in law firms in the legal industry to protect against representing both sides of the equation, if you will. And in the real estate world, it still exists, and JLL has been doing it for a long time, and they've been very capable at working through the intricacies of having that potential conflict. But as I said, at Macro and at Savills, it really isn't an issue. We are 100% on the tenant side.
Yeah, that's great. And I know a couple people from Savills, and you guys do great work. I've had Gabe on the Cornet podcast before, and he's talked a lot about the tenant representation and things like that. But you're focused solely on project management and construction and going through that process with tenants, mostly on the national scale too. You've been here for 6 months now, right?
Yeah, 6 months.
So what's been your biggest focus since making that shift here?
So, when you change jobs, and people change jobs for a variety of reasons, right? And the difficulty sometimes in deciding to change a job is finding the right place to go, the right home, if you will. And as you pointed out earlier, I've been doing this for a long time. I don't feel like I have a lot of moves left in me.
Right.
I figure this is my last one. And as part of that, then, you have to really be careful about what it is that you're looking for. You have to, it took me well over 14 months to really find the right place to land. And realistically, when you decide to leave, your reasons for leaving become important because you want to create a different environment for yourself. Now, the problem, of course, is who created the environment that makes you want to leave?
Right.
Is it you?
Right.
Is it the organization? Is it just the combination? In most instances, it's just the combination. In my instance, I was just looking for a different opportunity in a slightly, smaller, more what I would say, I know people will criticize this, but a more elegant way.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of led me to both Macro, Michael Glatt, to be honest with you, and Savills. And I've had a lot of relationships over the years with the folks from Savills, a lot of them from the Studley days, which was the predecessor of Savills. And I've known Michael Glatt for quite a few years as well, and Michael and I have often discussed at some point working together. It never really aligned until late last year when it kind of fell into place. And it seemed like, not just seemed like, it really was the right fit for me. So when you make that decision to leave, what happens to you emotionally is pretty dramatic.
Right.
And this isn't the first time I've left a job, and this isn't the first time I've started a new job. But it's that structure that you start to understand better about yourself. what motivates you.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's motivated by different things. So that idea to move, if it's motivated by money, which it can be, and there's nothing wrong with that, then you have to find a place that's going to satisfy that motivation. If it's motivated by title, or if it's motivated by the quality of the clients that that the firm has, then those things become your focus. And it's hard to change your focus if that's really what you're focused on. So my advice has always been to people, one, you should, on a regular basis, see what's in the market.
Mm-hmm.
See what is different from where you are. Sometimes it cements your reason to stay. Sometimes it makes you think, maybe now is the time for me to start looking. But it's the stripping away what could be the unhappiness of where you are for the value of where you're going to go. Because the unhappiness is what oftentimes leads people down the wrong path.
Right.
Right? It isn't the right way to look for a new job. I didn't like this here. I'm going to like it better here.
Exactly.
Chances are you'll like it better for a few months, and then it's going to come back, and you're going to be unhappy again. So you have to take the time, understand what it is that you want to do, what you really want out of the organization, and then go and find it. Those aren't easy tasks.
No, not at all. And you mentioned it. It's like being in any relationship too. Like, when you get out of a relationship with another person, you look at, okay, this is what kind of went wrong in this relationship. I'm going to go look for something else. But then you might enter that relationship and you run into the same problems. And then you really have to get introspective and find out that, it's probably me, or, something about me.
Right.
And what you're doing. And it's the same thing in the job hunt, in the job market. And it's become interesting, especially with my generation. They're always looking for the next thing. It's been very common. You don't find people staying at jobs for, 10, 20 years anymore in my generation. They're always moving. And what they find is that there's never that happiness that they want out of work, simply because either they can't find it, within their own, ambition and what they're looking to do professionally, or they just haven't found the right company. So what was your motivation, when it came to Savills and landed you here? You mentioned the gentleman, his name is Michael?
Michael Glatt.
Yeah,
right?
Michael. Right, and, working with him and that type of ambition, especially when you have a good working relationship with somebody in different companies, and, you have the curiosity to work together to see what you could build. Was that one of the main components?
Absolutely. But, realistically, I've been very lucky to have worked in organizations throughout my career, and surrounded myself or acquainted myself with really quality people. No difference at JLL than
Right.
at Savills. It's a different business. And I've been here 6 months, so I don't really have the full knowledge of what both companies are about, but I'm learning. And it's that learning, and you could say someone, of my generation, that learning phase is sometimes difficult because we're used to, being comfortable, being in a position, having all this knowledge, having all these experiences, having all these relationships, and you come someplace new and you have to develop new relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so you ask, my focus really since being here is to, one, understand what Macro does, understand their clients, understand Savills, get reacquainted with many of the brokers that I've known over the years and meet several of new ones. And I've had a really great experience over the first 6 months, just understanding what the focus of the various brokers in the firm happens to be. Have great conversations with leadership at Savills, obviously great conversations with leadership at Macro, and it's become a really rewarding first 6 months. But it's difficult.
Yeah.
Right? You wake up, there's an old book years ago. It's called "Who Moved My Cheese?"
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's really true because you change someone's routine. It takes a while to get back into a routine. So after 6 months, I feel like I know where I'm going. I get up in the morning, I know where I'm going. Like I have all of my routine, my new routine set, and that provides comfort. And so those are the things that it seems that become difficult for people the longer they're at one organization. And that's what I hear a lot of. People say, I can't move. I've been here forever.
Right.
I've been here for 15 years. I wouldn't know how to start a new job.
Becomes a part of their,
Becomes
the brand.
a part.
Yeah.
And that oftentimes also changes the way that they work
Right.
and the drive and the motivation that they have within that organization. So I like, what you say, your generation. I don't really know what the generations are anymore, but I will tell you that people shouldn't just stay someplace. And there's two reasons for that, right? There's no more, back even prior to my generation, my dad and my grandfather, they worked for the same company for their entire
Right,
career,
right.
right? There was employer loyalty and employee loyalty.
Right.
Those things don't really exist anymore.
No.
Right? So you have to, that's the first thing you have to come to grips with, is that my company or my new company or my old company may think the world of me, and I think I may be, irreplaceable, but at the end of the day, everybody's replaceable,
Yeah.
and everybody should strive to make sure that they're protected and that they're covered. And that's a hard lesson for people of my generation, because we always believed that, oh, this was a company I was going to spend the rest of my career with. And a lot of the more current generations are saying, oh no, I'm not going to put that much faith in anybody that I work for, because I'm the person that has to develop my career. So that's a really unique stance, which is that people take responsibility, and that responsibility, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it propels someone to go out and look for something different. And as I said, as long as you were clear on what your motivation is, and as long as you satisfy the motivation, then it's usually a well-executed decision. And if it isn't, and you're 25 or 30 or 35, very easy to fix that and move on to another firm. When you get to be my age, right, doing that, moving after 6 months or a year is really viewed differently.
Right.
Like, well, why did you make that decision? Didn't you know better? What did you not know about that company? So the good news is I knew a lot, and I talked to a lot of my friends here at Savills before I came on board, and I definitely had lengthy conversations with the folks at Macro that I met along the way, and it just felt like the right place for me.
Right.
So, but it takes time.
And you mentioned the focus, though, and how that focus changes. And it is very important, because I remember when I started at Advanced Group, I had been working on the end user side, for so long. So I wasn't in the service-based industry, even though I was serving, WeWork members at that
Right.
time, opening their spaces and things like that. But, when you make that focus shift really back into sales and business development and also project management and those type of things at a national level, the way that you wake up every day and approach every day is incredibly different, because really I was like running my own business. I was starting and prospecting and figuring out strategies, whereas coming from more of the project angle to the BD angle created a whole shift. So what is your focus been and shift been, in the last 6 months that's really changed?
I mean, that's a really important aspect of moving to Macro, which is I do have a much more expanded business development role. Doesn't mean I'm not going to still be involved in projects. It doesn't mean that I won't support clients in various projects throughout the course of my time here, but there is a real focus on developing existing relationships, but new relationships, and not just new relationships for Macro, new relationships for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right, that focus is very different. You get up every day, your focus is on what are my clients going to need from me today, and what am I going to do to make contact or to potentially start building relationships with other clients and other people in the industry. And remember, this is a huge dollar industry, but
Right.
it's a small industry
Right.
in terms of the people, right? There's more so in New York City than other cities, but my focus now is just not New York.
Right.
So I've had opportunities outside of New York, throughout Europe and throughout Asia, and I'll continue to pursue those opportunities with the benefit of a team here at Macro that is really structured on managing projects across the U.S. and across the globe without always having to have people on the ground in those areas.
Mhm.
So that offers a whole different opportunity for me.
Yep.
So you can sell, and I can sell the business in a very elegant and very sophisticated way. And sometimes people are like, no, I need somebody on the ground. Well, that's great, and that's probably not the right opportunity for us if we don't have somebody in those areas. But we have Macro PMs across the U.S.
Right.
We have Savills PMs across the U.S. and Savills PMs across Europe and Asia and the Middle East. So we can cover those with boots on the ground. But primarily, it's just been a much broader brush stroke for me to develop business and continue. And look, I've had some success. I've not had as much success as I'd like to have so far, The industry itself, the market itself is a little bit on its head, but these things will work out, and you hope you're positioned yourself right for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come back to what you were saying about working on projects globally, but more importantly, probably, is the state of the market. And I actually saw Gabe post this morning on LinkedIn. New York City currently has as much available office space as Austin, Texas, and Nashville, Tennessee does total in their entire market. And that doesn't even include the sublease market. It's made for quite a predicament for both landlords and tenants. So how is that communication? How are you communicating with your clients now, and specifically through your specialty, in construction and in project management? Are there certain things you're telling them to look for or negotiate for? Because we had this conversation last time during COVID.
Right.
When we talked about, construction costs and things like that. What's the message now?
So, the message is different. The industry is different. The message is a combination of things, which is you can't stop from making decisions. And that's what we learned in COVID early on, is there was a lot of, I'm just not going to make a decision. I'm just going to do what is the easy thing to do. I'm going to let my lease run out, or I'm going to just renew for a couple of years, but I'm not going to make any decisions, because not knowing is the reason for not making that decision. In today's market, it's a little more sophisticated. It's a little more problematic in some ways, but people have to start making decisions again. And those decisions, albeit different than they have been in the past, we're not doing those 40, 50,000 direct build projects that we did, many of us did day in and day out over the last 10 or 15 years. Those projects have become much smaller in some ways. They've become turnkey, built out by landlords, and they've also been sublets or furnished sublets, space that was, that was left behind
Right.
during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I see mostly in the business. So it is changing, but I've developed over the last 5 years this tenant advocacy approach, which is really guiding a tenant after the brokers have done all their work, guiding the tenant through a turnkey situation. A turnkey, when the landlord's building out the space, no matter what anybody says during the negotiations and what anybody writes in the work letter, at the end, when it's being built, there's always this, I would say, struggle
Yep.
on the tenant to make sure they get what they want
Yep.
and what they feel they're entitled to, and for the landlord to provide what they believe the tenant is entitled to, which sometimes is contrary. So that's what we see. That's what I'm seeing predominantly now in the market. And there's a lot of tenants out there that don't believe, because it's a turnkey, that they need proper representation from a PM. Couldn't be further from the truth.
Absolutely.
And it's really fundamental in the process. And that doesn't mean that the brokers do a phenomenal job finding the space, negotiating the lease terms, and then getting money from the landlord to actually modify the space or upgrade the space. But having said that, if the landlord takes on the responsibility, there is a lack of transparency. In a direct build, we see everything.
Mm-hmm.
We hire the contractor, architect, engineer, all the consultants, watch the space getting built, involved in every step of the way. In a turnkey, we are excluded from a lot of those decisions and a lot of that process. So we have to understand and work a little bit differently in order to represent the tenant better. Those are based on relationships.
Right.
You can be a great PM, but if you don't have the relationship with the landlords or the contractors or the architects who are willing to say, Fred, as the representative for your tenant, and us having such a strong relationship and knowing you've supported us in the past and you support the landlord, we can work in a more collaborative way. We can get more done more quickly and without as much controversy, if
Right.
you will. Well, how come I didn't get new shades? Well, it says you're not getting new shades. How come I didn't get new lights? Well, it says you're not getting new lights. You walk me around, you show me all your pre-built space, and it's got beautiful lights, and I don't have these lights. Right? Those are the things that people hear during the process, and then doesn't necessarily manifest itself in the lease or in the work letter, or it does in a way that is it's open to interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
That interpretation is where the issues come into play. I interpreted that to mean this. I just have one. I have one that I'm working on right now, where the question is between downlights and lay-in fixtures. I know it sounds really parochial to talk about lighting like that, but it's become a huge issue on this particular project because the client's like, I'm going to have 70 or 80 incandescent downlights in my space versus 100% LED lights. So that's something that the tenant thought they were getting, and the landlord is saying no.
Yeah.
So now, we're ultimately going to reach some accommodation on both sides, but left to its own, it would have ended up as a fight.
Yeah.
Right.
And lighting, for what it's worth, is a huge aspect to a space, especially in today's nature where you are really doing everything you can to draw people into your space. Lighting's a huge component in that, so I do understand the conflict within that. But that's the thing too, is once that gets discovered, if you have a situation where you're working together, with the landlord representing the tenant from early on in that process, you're going to be able to identify that quickly. But then once you get down the process and that lighting's already been installed and you have to come to some type of resolution, the amount of money that costs is substantial.
Just emotional collateral too.
Yeah.
It's becomes, you enter into a tenant-landlord relationship in an uncomfortable position already.
Right.
And, that goes back to the other, point that I've made for years, which is love working with the brokers. I've been very successful in working with the brokers at JLL and just, starting to introduce myself to the brokers here at Savills. And I am a part of the ORPM, the Owners Rep Project Management Alliance, which is educational group that helps tenants and helps clients understand what a PM does and why you would want to actually hire a PM.
That's interesting.
So that's a very important factor. And by the way, it is all of the top PM firms in the city that are part of that organization. But it's not just educating the clients, though, and tenants. It's also educating the brokers.
Right.
Because we can be more useful to them. We can help them through difficult aspects of negotiating a term in a lease with a landlord and a tenant who just can't seem to get on the same page with a particular thing. It usually comes down to air conditioning. It comes down to electrical consumption. Yep. All of those things become almost moot at the end of it because you've spent a lot of time arguing over something that is what it's going to be anyways, and getting people comfortable with with the situation. I've had people argue over a degree on an HVAC setting, right? Oh, I'm going to get between this degree and that degree during the summer, and this degree and that degree during the winter. And at the end of the day, none of those things are really relative because the basis is on things that are not real life. It's written, it's in the lease.
Right.
The landlords can say, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, but if your tenant's uncomfortable because it's too hot or too cold, are you really going to let that go the way it goes? So those are the things that we can kind of work out early on, and a lot of those terms in leases today are antiquated terms. They're
Right.
things that aren't relevant anymore. We're not engineers. A lot of people that do what I do are in fact engineers, but the brokers aren't necessarily engineers, the PMs aren't necessarily engineers, and when we try and explain to a tenant what is the reality of that term, it becomes overly complicated. It becomes a rallying point for one side or the other to say, I'm not giving in or I'm not giving
Right.
in. And we spend too much time worrying about a degree or two when in reality, if it's cold in the wintertime, to have a conversation with the chief engineer and say, it's really cold up here,
Right.
can we do something about it? Or it's really hot in here, can we do something about it? Those are the things that we now should focus on more than just those, some of those individual specifications, because they don't always hold up. People walk around with a temperature saying, "Oh, you dip below
right.
the number."
Is the siren
right?
gonna go off?
Yeah, there's really no way to know, but
Right.
we spend a lot of time negotiating those those points.
Right. And you mentioned too a couple things, but the emotional collateral. That's a really good way to present what you do and the value you can provide to both a tenant and a landlord. To save them the just energy and time it's going to take to go through these points that in the end really don't take a lot of time. And what's so important too now especially is the tenant experience. Is making sure that they want to come to these office buildings, and a lot of the high Class A buildings have done the necessary things with the
amenity space.
Exactly,
right.
and those sort of things. But now you're seeing it in the lower Class A buildings, Class B buildings, and I don't even know about Class C buildings. They're in a tough spot. but, anything they can do to make it a better client experience and, bringing on someone like Savills, both from a tenant and project management representation side, can save them a lot of that emotional collateral.
I mean, that's really what we should be focused on.
Uh-huh.
Is building the relationship, making sure that everybody's clear what the terms are. And look, I'm not going to supplant the need for lawyers to
Of course,
negotiate,
yeah.
right? That's that's kind of silly for me to say. And I'm not saying that we should ignore what the lawyers say at all. All I'm saying is that we should be a little bit more pragmatic when it comes to certain aspects of the lease and the employee experience, right? So we should be focused on what is the team, what is my team, tenant A, what is my team going to feel about this space? What are they going to, what do they want? Now, look, we've all been in those meetings where people making decisions on the client side have said, I don't care what my team wants, this is what they're getting. And on the other hand, people have spent a lot of time trying to understand what the employees want, and they still don't come back to work. Like,
Right.
we've been seeing that too. So I wish I had the crystal ball. I wish I had the answers. The only thing I can tell you is that we've had to change our focus. We've had to change what we do and how we do it. And we have to continue to understand what it is that people want. And, we lean on architects, we lean on engineers, we lean on property managers. Believe it or not, you learn so much about a building when you talk to the tenants in that building, when
yeah.
you talk to the property manager, when you talk to the chief engineer. And those used to be things that people just didn't do. Now everybody's out there, right? Everyone's doing podcasts, everybody's putting
Exactly,
articles up
exactly.
on LinkedIn, everyone's talking about their workplace and return to office and how to build the better office and what people are looking for. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of great suggestions out there. There's a lot of useful information. I don't really know if anybody's captured it properly yet.
It is fascinating. And, as far as like the podcasts go and the information and the content, I think people really want to be thought leaders because we're going through this evolution of work where there's a lot of opportunity to have different thoughts and go about it in different ways. So, I focus mostly on the moving aspect and the global and national aspect of that, what we do in our world. But even still, I was on a workplace strategy team at Indeed, and our client there was the employee, and we
Right.
always made focus of that when we built out our offices. What is going to provide the best employee experience for our employees? And we took a different approach if we were building an engineer an office than we would for a sales office. I remember we put floor-to-ceiling windows in one of our buildings for our engineers, and we had gone back like 6 months later after it opened, and all the blinds were down, and it's pitch black.
Right.
Yeah.
We
and
see
it's-
a lot of that.
Right, exactly.
See a lot of that.
And it's things like that, though, that it's you have to take into consideration. Now, though, it's a completely different animal and a completely different beast, and it's going to be fascinating because especially in a place like New York City, you don't come here or live here to sit in your apartment.
Well, the interesting thing is, and I think everybody's noticed this is nothing, groundbreaking, but, you walk on the streets, and we saw this in COVID, right? During the height of COVID, everybody was too uncomfortable coming to the office, yet they were nose to nose in
Yeah.
pubs on the Upper East
Right.
Side, Upper West Side,
Right.
Lower
It's the
Manhattan.
same thing.
Right? But now when you go on the streets, traffic is back.
Oh,
I don't know
yeah.
if you've taken a cab recently,
Yeah.
taken an Uber recently, try to find a quick lunch place, recently. It's impossible. So people are back. Where are they?
Right.
That's kind of where I'm curious about is where are they?
And that's the thing, is it the commuters, who it's like the people who live on Long Island or upstate in New Jersey who just don't want to get on the train? And that's a large portion of, these employees with the city offices in the city. But I can't imagine that's more than 50% of a lot of companies.
I don't, honestly, I feel like the activity levels in the city are absolutely pre-COVID activity levels.
Without a doubt.
But yet we're still seeing this reduction in office space. I guess the question is it half of the office for a certain period of time and the other half, for the other time? So are people just platooning, coming to the office and being out, in the industry? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I see a lot of empty offices. I see a lot of people on the streets it doesn't add up to me sometimes. Like, where is that disconnect?
It's fascinating. Want to take a break real quick and get a glass of water?
Yeah.
You good?
I'm good.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay. We can restart. I said it's fascinating. Let me get my next thought. I would definitely want to talk about the national work and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, we can keep on this. Okay. It's fascinating, and it's going to be fascinating to see, when push comes to shove now, and if this available office space keeps increasing, what really happens? Are we going to see conversions? Are we going to see buildings getting knocked down and rebuilt, based on cost and value and stuff like that? Because again, the foot traffic, I mean, you look out the window here, Park Avenue is full of traffic, full of cars, people walking. So, what ultimately happens is going to be really interesting. And again, what are we? We are 2 years post-COVID, really. I guess the beginning of 2022 is when people really started to get back into, living normally and,
Right.
and stuff like that. That's spring, so maybe about a year. I guess it could change because, like every bubble, every bubble pops.
Right. It's a really interesting point because there's oftentimes a correlation between the residential market and the commercial market. And what we're seeing now is the residential market has still stayed, the rents have really stayed high and they're going up and inventory's way down. And again, so I guess there's still a lot of people living in the city. And of course, I've heard it over the course of my career every time there's been a downturn in the market for whatever reason, including COVID, but including financial situations. Oh, the city's dead. People are leaving in droves. City's just going to, it's never going to be the same city. It always comes back,
Yeah.
right? That's the one thing we learned about New York. It always comes back. So interestingly enough, from a residential perspective, it's busy. It's
Yeah.
crowded. Just look at the market. Look at the inventory. And I live in Manhattan, and I've lived in Manhattan exclusively for the past 22 years. So I've seen a lot of I've seen 9/11, post 9/11. I've seen post financial crashes. I saw this savings and loan crash, right?
Right.
So I've seen all those things, and I've heard all the same statements over and over, and I just kind of brush them away. This is very different.
It is.
What we're experiencing now is very different. But yet, there's still a demand for talent in this city, even if people working from home.
One of the biggest aspects.
Right? So the question is, if I still have to commute 3 days a week, 4 days a week, I think it's really going to go to 4, but let's just say it's 3. Do I want to be in the city or do I want to be in the suburbs? Does that commute, is it just simply better if I live outside the city and come in 3 days a week? Or is it still way more fun to be in the city, less taxing on me from a commuting perspective to be in the city, right? Have a 20-minute commute versus an hour-and-a-half commute, right? Rents being what they are, you live in smaller space, it's hard to work at home. There's all these conflicting components to it. And I think it's just a really interesting time to see what happens, both on the commercial side and on the residential side. But, from a city perspective, maybe what happens is a lot of the support services for the commercial real estate business, small brokerage firms, PM firms, smaller consultants, right, that always had a piece of the industry, piece of the business. Maybe they start to feel the pressure more than the firms like Savills and Macro and some of the other large PM and brokerage firms, because maybe it's just a winnowing down of who supports that industry.
Right.
Don't know. I mean, that's kind of a dark approach to it, but things will change, right? Firms will become different. Emphasis on what people need to do to drive business will change, right?
Exactly. And see, that's, I think, one of the advantages that I have at the advanced group and that you have at Macro is we are national and we are global. And that was a huge pivot that we made during COVID specifically. And,
Right.
Because my work is national, I don't depend on New York City for my income. Right. My income is based all across the world. And, I do different projects across the world. And it's a unique proposition, too, is because not a lot of other movers had made that pivot yet. Right. A lot of movers are still New York City based and local based and transactional based, whereas me and the advanced group, we're very account based. We're going to work with you and develop best practices and technology implementations and those sort of things to help you function better within your workspaces. And that's the same thing you guys do at Savills. So Savills and Macro, what's that approach been like for you?
So, I've always been national and global. The focus here is a little bit different because of the way that we're structured and the processes that we've developed internally at Macro. It actually lends itself to supporting work outside the city much better,
Mm-hmm.
much more efficiently, and clients are starting to see that. Potential clients are starting to see that. So that's a value that we have here that I was very interested in understanding and becoming a part of, because as you said, it broadens my opportunities, right? It broadens the industry's opportunities. But New York is still a hub and will always be a hub. In New York, interestingly enough, a lot of my global projects really stem from New York-based companies or big present New York City businesses that have a certain position within their organization and have taken on a bit of a leadership approach from a real estate perspective. So we still see a lot, and the brokers here and my team at Macro and the resources that exist through Savills, both from the U.S. perspective, and they're not massive like some of the other brokerage firms are. They're really targeted in cities that they believe have the biggest growth potential. But then throughout Europe, all continents supporting those projects there in lots of different ways. Savills, has residential side.
Mm-hmm.
JLL never had the residential side. I don't know the residential market. I'm just saying, it's really opened my eyes to what you can do in a more nimble business than in some of these behemoths where it's set its course and it's not turning, right? And turning those huge organizations is a challenge. In a more nimble organization like Savills and Macro, we can pivot very quickly. So we can adjust much more quickly than other firms can adjust. So, and that's really what we're trying to do now is just, what is that pivot point going to be? And be ready. Even if we don't know it today, when it pivots, we will be there to be part of that process. That's what is truly going to separate, certain firms from other firms.
Yeah, and that is such an important aspect of a company during a time like this, is being nimble and being capable of analyzing truly what is going on in the market, what do our clients need, and how can we provide it for them. And that is something that Macro and Savills does extraordinarily well. And you can look at their resume and pedigree over the last 5 to 10 years. They've done that, very actively with Macro. I believe there was another component to Savills that isn't coming to mind right now that delved into shared workspace and the analyzation of companies.
Workforce, group, the workplace team.
Right.
Again, all the pieces that exist in the much larger firms exist here to a certain extent within Savills and Macro. It's just that it's more, I would say, firm-wide based than the individual practice groups. Right? So there's lots of things that I still have to learn here, lots of things that I look forward to learning here. But there's changes. We know that, right? It's a little scary sometimes. We started about changing jobs, but now things are going to change. They're going to continue to change, and changing jobs at this time. Look, people had questioned me like, why would you change coming out of COVID? And I said, well, this is a good time.
Right. Exactly.
It gives me an opportunity to really kind of dig in and get to know things and not have to be running 5, 6, 7 projects at the same time. So this was a nice opportunity to really get to know what Macro is about. And of course, we've been busy. I've been busy. I've been busier, but surprisingly, every day things, you start to hear things that are going on in the industry. People are now starting to make decisions, right? Not just talk. So that's a big piece of it. Anybody who's supporting commercial real estate business has talked about quietly outside of their clients necessarily necessarily about the difficulties in getting people to make decisions.
Yeah.
We show them, we show them, we show them, present them, present them, put a lot of effort forward for them to say, thanks but no thanks, right? And that's fine. I'm not saying there's a problem there, but the brokers and people on, the PMs, especially folks like myself who do a lot of advisory work, we are constantly trying to get to our clients. Where are you today? What are you thinking? How can we help you? Here's what we're hearing. Here's what we're seeing in your industry. So enlighten people, get people engaged so that we can help them make decisions. I think the reason why people weren't making decisions is because we weren't offering solutions.
Right.
We were just saying, here's the problem.
Yep. Exactly.
What do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
You can go here, you can go there, you can go there. That's not necessarily a solution, right? It is, but it's not an elegant solution.
Exactly.
So the deal should be understand what my clients want, understand what they're, you can't ask every employee what they want.
Of course not.
And by the way, what they tell you and what is reality is oftentimes different anyways, right? So people will say, I want a beautiful office to come to every day. They still don't come.
Right.
People say, I want free lunch. And you provide free lunch, and lunch goes bad.
Yep.
Now what are we going to do with all the food that's left over? So it's learning, understanding what is going to drive people to come to the office, and some of it is just going to naturally happen.
Exactly.
People
That's what I think is going to happen.
There's that little bit of, I feel a little bit left out, FOMO, right?
Exactly.
Right? But I look at it more from a training perspective. The more junior you are on any team, you learn a lot by other people's interactions, overhearing people's interactions, those casual collisions that you come upon during the course of your workday that you're not having anymore because you're not in the office.
Right. And it was largely in tech too, and they just had the massive layoffs, about 6 months ago, right around the holidays and the new year. And you think that'd be the wake-up call for a lot of these people, where we were talking about earlier too, when you're at these big behemoths of companies, they don't really care about, you are an employee to them and you are expendable, exactly, in a number. And you would think as these people re-enter the job market now, many maybe, for the first time, since they've graduated college, or the second time tops, you'd think they'd take on a new approach. I'm going to go to this new company, being a junior now, starting new. I need to be present. I need to be there. I need to understand the culture, what people expect of me. Again, this is all tying back to how we started this conversation in terms of being introspective and discussing with yourself, was I the problem or was the company the problem,
It's hard to admit that I may have been part of it.
Right.
Personally. And it's hard to do in a personal relationship, it's hard to do in a business relationship. Those are things that become, very important. And by the way, you should be any decision you make to change companies
Should be a little scary.
If you don't question that several times during the first 6 months to a year,
right,
new location, you probably haven't made the right decision.
Right.
Right. That just means that you're having to think differently.
Exactly.
Act differently.
Being uncomfortable isn't always a bad thing.
It's not.
Because it allows for change, and as long as that change is for the better and the betterment of yourself and the company you're working for, then in the long run it's all going to work out. But go ahead.
And it's becoming more holistic, Jack. What we do as PMs, we have to be more holistic. And what do I mean by that? We use this to our advantage, like saying there's architect PM, there's an engineering PM, there's PMs and all the consultants, and we have superintendents, assistant superintendents on the construction side. But PMs have to be able to understand a much wider range.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have that wheelhouse, so to speak. We may have our subject matter expertise at times, but we have to broaden it. And we have to continue to broaden that. We have to be able to offer solutions to our clients and potential clients that people haven't offered them before, right? So again, it's constantly understanding the market, constantly understanding what's available out there, and everyone says it, but it's listening. Right?
Yep.
Talk to your clients, and I use this all the time. People make fun of me, but anybody can run a project, right? I can run a project, I can build anything. On the other hand, it's much harder to build a relationship.
Yep.
But it's much more rewarding to build a relationship, and it's much more profitable to build a relationship, right? So in many instances today, we talked about this earlier, I'm not always chasing projects. Of course I'm chasing projects.
Right.
People that I can say, look, I know you have nothing today. You may not have anything for 2 or 3 years, but there's lots of things that will be going on within your organization that we can help with, and here's how, right?
Exactly.
Doesn't mean that the competitiveness is gone. Doesn't mean they're not going to send it out competitively bid, right? When something actually goes on, it just means that we're now starting to develop those relationships.
Exactly, and it's that trust and the understanding that, you know, regardless of whether it's a big project or there's tiny questions or details that you need assistance within your portfolio. We mentioned the lease negotiations and that type of intricacy before. You know, we can help, and that those, again, the same conversations I have with clients. Like, you know, listen, I don't care if you don't have an office move coming up for 2 to 3 years. There's a litany of other things that, you know, we can assist with across your portfolio, and even if it is just, you know, getting some desks out of there for liquidation, or you know, putting some things in storage for the time being, or whatever it may be, you know, we can help and just create that relationship and understand how do we communicate with each other, which is a huge aspect of it. You know, how do you like to be communicated with? What type of questions do I need to ask you? You talking about, you know, often creative solutions and stuff like that. Once I understand how you operate within your organization, you know, what type of, what the hierarchy is, or a variety of things, who's responsible for what, that's when you can start to offer those creative solutions to say, hey, you know, I see you're doing it this way. If we implemented this software, you know, this would help, you know, a lot with whatever it may be.
There's lots of those examples, and there's lots of those opportunities to engage with a potential client or an existing, you know, client, to kind of help them through the process, support them. Um, I don't know, you know, as we said earlier, where this goes. I don't think any of us know. I don't even think we know the time frame.
No.
You know, people say 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years. Again, I don't think it's so much what the schedule is, because the schedule is changing each and every day. What is the industry is changing. We just, for the folks that aren't willing to embrace the fact that it's changed, and embrace the fact that our process is different, our business is different, right? Then they will find themselves in a difficult predicament.
Right.
Right.
And that's kind of how we started this conversation, you know, as far as the change goes. You know, as it does change, Fred, we appreciate you having on the podcast and having these discussions. This was great today. So, yeah, no, my pleasure. Thank you. And looking forward to the next conversation and see where we're at then.
Sounds good.
Thanks again, Fred. Thanks, everybody, for listening.